Do you have questions?
Wasn't a question, comment.
I have one.
Yeah.
In terms of in summertime, when school is closed, what happens with the gardens and who maintains them? How does that work?
Who wants to take that one? Well, I have a little experience with that. The gardens that are started in some of the schools that have the easiest situation is if some of the parents in the community get involved, or grandparents. Because you have a potential. I mean, obviously, a lot of what grows in the gardens grows in the summertime, and you have a lot of potential for that to be maintained. The one school that I do the most work with is the Edgewood Magnet School, and they have a parent group that works with the children. And from the time the season starts, there's an afternoon a week that the parents that work with the garden and the children come together and work on the garden, and they do that all through the summer. And I think that not only do the children learn, but there's a consistency, and they form a nice group around the working with the garden. Some of the other schools have summer programs that key into the gardens, but it is a very big issue because several of the schools have no one to maintain the gardens in the summer. And then, it's a real question about what they should grow and how they plant it. And for example, the Land Trust gives out tomatoes and eggplants and peppers. Well, you can't put those in the ground in May and then expect to come back and see them doing their thing in September. You have to have a relationship to that garden and those plants. And so it is a very big issue.
Yeah, I think you need to bridge the community and...
Yeah, we tried a few things. So in Westport, first we did in the summer, we said families can sign up to water and harvest once a week. And that sign up went like in 30 minutes. There people have cars, they have time, they can drive, that's all fun and good. And in Bridgeport we found that didn't work as well. So we put the gardens in the schools with the summer program. And that's good as long as the teacher has the stipend, to really pay attention. And the third thing we tried was we have summer interns. So we'll just run around and maintain all the gardens while there's no students. And that's cool and that works, but it's not as really impactful. And now what we're going to do is we're going to think deeply about really just planting the gardens for the spring and the fall. And we're just going to relax in the summer. And with Elliot Coleman and everyone else working on it, then you have to teach them, how to take a piece of plastic. It's no big deal. And so we have a greenhouse going in at the urban farm, and we're going to have the kids start the seeds, put the seeds in, have a big harvest in the spring. Unless there's a big summer program, leave it. And then we'll plant I don't even know, I think midsummer we'll plant the early fall stuff, and then they come to school and there's a whole big thing going on. So I think that's what Common Ground is so great at. They've been doing for 20 years field trips and programming and academic programs that fit into each year and each age in the state of Connecticut's curriculum. So for us, we're just making it up. Why don't you have a salad day? Why don't you have it this day? But what we're going to do with Common Ground and what that resource center is going to say is they're going to be you can go on this website, there'll be a button to press, you say your age, your class, or whatever, and it'll say this is what to plant this day, this month it's going to harvest, it's going to maximize the growing time for your students of your age, and here's some things you can talk to about that.
So one of the things that, for example, I've done in the Westville area is connected, because Common Ground has interns, and the interns have to put in time as a part of their programs at Common Ground. And so sometimes you can link one of the young people from Common Ground High School with a parent, with the kids, and so then you have, 3 different levels of working together, the parent generation, the high school generation, and the elementary school generation. And that's another building block, and doing that with Common Ground. I mean, they really have the tools to do that already, so that's a great piece of it.
Hi, my name is Luke. Just curious, what institutional perspective policy surrounding compost, and how do you work compost into your logistics for single food and both and returning whatever time you back to?
I mean, any institution, every institution is going to be different in what their specific policies are. We advocate for. If they don't have a program in place for trying to compost, we advocate for implementing and putting one in, starting with pre-consumer waste out of the kitchen. Post-consumer waste, that's once the food hits the plate and goes out to the cafeteria, it's much harder to kind of manage composting. What can you compost, what you can't. It's not impossible, but once everything we advocate for is step by step by step. So that composting should definitely be a program put in place. Some of the biggest challenges we run across is where does it go? Where does the pre-consumer food scraps sitting on the back loading dock go? Who's going to take them? Can it be done on site with the grounds crew, depending on the school or the institution? Can they compost there, or do we need to partner with a local farm? You know, so that a local farmer might be delivering food and taking the scraps or food for compost back to their farm and being able to compost it correctly. Those are some of the challenges too. I'll tell you too, just to know, the other thing we advocate for is better management of planning to reduce. Even composting is a great way of managing waste. The best way to manage waste is don't create it in the first place. And there's a whole bunch of steps that go with it, obviously, but you stop and think about why should we be buying food, transporting food, cooking food, serving food, and throwing it away. It's all going into compost. So the Department of Environmental Protection online actually has an inverted pyramid, like the best scenarios for managing food waste, and that's reduce the amount of overproduction is at the top. Believe it or not, compost is like way down, almost, it's just above incinerators and landfills. So that kind of education is critical too.
Packaging is another big problem.
Oh.
Because a lot of the schools don't, you know, for example, Common Ground has a model where they wash the dishes that the kids eat off of. The kids are taught how to separate the compost so that you can get some benefit out of it. They have place on site to use it. Well, most schools aren't going to have things like that, and so that poses problems. Even in the community gardens, you know, not all the gardens do composting. Some do, some don't. I mean, it's something that we teach. It's one of the workshops that we have every year, teaching how to do composting, and it's something we try to encourage. But when you talk to someone that's working on, like, I met with someone from the Food, Kagan Engel, who's on the chair of the Food Policy Council, with Cheryl Baldwin, who works for the state in recycling, and she said, you know, the place to start with compost and recycling is on the local level in people's backyard, and doing it on that level. On a citywide level, in terms of big industry, it's a huge, huge issue how to handle that, and yet you realize that there's a problem that also is a resource that we don't really handle all that well. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen in that arena from what I've learned anyway.
We think in the school gardens it's important that the kids see the full cycle. I didn't know anything about this 3 years ago. I didn't know composting. I thought dirt was always dirt and always good. And now the best farmers I know go to sleep worried about the soil. So for them to see, and it doesn't have to be there, once that's on their plate, it is tough to get it back, but the kitchen waste composted into their little garden, you know, that's kind of cool. But what we find, it's funny, like Westport is an awesome school system. My kids are so lucky to go there, but it's so great to have so many rules. They're afraid of the composting because of the varmints. You know, then you go to Ridgefield and they're like, they'll put it out back. So we get better headway, and it's easier to work in more unstructured places. But as far as like, we wanted to start in Bridgeport a collection and composting thing, and that's a little like business-wise mind-boggling. It's trust liability, and you're going to make any money, I don't know. But if each little garden has a little composting thing, from an education standpoint in school, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, one of the other things with Yale, which I think John probably could speak to, but I know that when Yale decided that they were going to do post-consumer waste, they're building their own facility right now in Connecticut because there's no facility that can handle large-scale compost. Yeah, local, nothing in Connecticut. So not everyone has the money to build, you know, multi-million-dollar composting facilities.
There is, I believe there's one in New Milford, but
Yeah.
the fact that it's in New Milford, not Milford, New Milford, which that's a New York mile by Kent.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah,
And it's big, but it's not big enough.
No.
And it costs to get the stuff there.
You have to truck it there.
But that's good, because if Yale does it, everyone's going to come.
Other universities, well, yeah. Lee, you had a question?
Well, I do have a question. On this point, I'm reminded of a friend of mine who is very successful at vermiculture because she's so afraid of the worms. I learned what to put in because that's the way to keep the worms inside the box. So maybe incentivize to get a little vermiculture. I think I almost pulled the room. I knew because I work at the Community Foundation. And I want to bring it back to this issue of involvement and community involvement because over the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've been able to change a little bit of the internal conversation as a community foundation where I think I can honestly say that I probably have $100,000 in my budget that could be directed toward community involvement to incentivize not only the creation of, for example, the Clinton Avenue School Garden, but from our perspective, much more important, the involvement of the community. My sense, though, is that we're still very much at the beginning stages of having people involved, particularly in school gardens, evolving beyond the build it and they will come. In the inner city, in Fairhaven, where I live 5 blocks from here. They will not come if you just simply build it. They will come if they have a relationship. And so what I'm interested in finding out how to fund and how to use our money for is for any garden that has, and I know that I'm speaking to many of the converted here, because Stacy and the work that you guys are doing out in West River is phenomenal. But I'm interested in figuring out a way to fund more gardens in general, and specifically community gardens, where they build a relationship with the community that can walk to that garden. And then the other thing that I'm interested in, and I know that the church on the meeting house on Whitney Avenue is an example, but I saw even better examples out in Denver, Colorado, where churches in inner city neighborhoods get funding from the local community foundations to build gardens where people that go to the church and in large measure don't live in the neighborhood work on a garden with people that live in the neighborhood, and then the food is split according to need. But the idea is to use church grounds as a meeting place between people that go to church and don't live in the neighborhood, and people that live in the neighborhood and do not go to that church. So if anyone has any thoughts about that or any comments, I'm all ears, and I'd love to talk now and later.
There's actually been an increase, I'm sorry, I'll just say real quickly, there's actually been an increase of churches in the last year, sitting on the garden committee here in New Haven. We've had more requests for gardens at churches this year than any time in the time that I've been on the committee. So I think it is something that some of the churches are seeing as a way of relating to their communities and needs in their communities. So that was the only piece that I wouldn't say, but it's really on the rise in a way that's very exciting. I think we've had 4 or 5 requests for new gardens at churches.
I'm wondering if the Land Trust should talk to the people from Connect, formerly ECHO, because they're working with churches that are their philosophy is relational culture. It's all about building relationships between people in the church, and that concept, connecting to the community, would go a long way. But
I think the Common Ground resource site will be very appropriate for churches as well. And there was a time we were saying any nonprofit that wanted a garden, we'd build it. The problem is all these nonprofits in fancy towns wanted gardens. So while they were building their $1 million extensions, we said, not in any wealthy towns. But if you wanted to be 50-50 with us, we'd be happy to offer any church in New Haven that wants a garden, but they have to want the garden. So then they have to show up, they have to have a teacher or person, but we found we can build a garden for $1,000. We know where to get the lumber, soil, the fence, you don't have deer, it's not that bad. And building the garden is a piece of cake, so it's the act of some administrators having some fear around the garden, right, and all that stuff. But as far as community building, our first builds in Bridgeport, like 50 people would come, and the last one, 150 came. It was a carnival at the Garden Bill. It's really, and it takes a little while. You have to get going. It has to be in the paper, and then most people go to these places and they leave, right? And then the word spreads, and it was literally a carnival. And so we believe in the school garden building process as a tremendous awareness builder around the whole idea of gardens, farms, and local food.
Yeah. I was wondering if anyone is aware of an initiative, either citywide or statewide, of that next step in the process of, as people do the hands-on in the gardening, hands-on in the kitchen as far as cooking and learning what to do and how to eat healthier. Are there any concerted, like, again, citywide or statewide initiatives?
Yeah,
Not statewide, citywide, it's all usually done in-house. There is actually a nationwide push to, that's tied in with Michelle Obama's Let's Move initiative. It's called Chefs Move to Schools. So it's the objective is to get chefs from any line of business, restaurants, country clubs, hotels, to adopt a school and to go in and work with the kids in educating them about where food comes from, and work with the staff on how to provide different types of food to serve. And in some of those cases, if there is the opportunity for food in the garden to come into the kitchen, you know, they can do that. Is there a formal program in place? No, I mean, I do it when I go to work with schools. We do it, but it's not I don't know of any citywide or nation or statewide.
The New Haven Food Policy Council is working on a food action plan for the city of New Haven, and this is something that actually I wish Tegan were here because she could talk about it in much greater detail. But certainly the idea of people learning how to prepare food is something that is a big focus of that. This is kind of what I was addressing when I was saying that, you know, it's one thing to learn how to grow food, it's another thing to know what to do with it so that you enjoy eating it. And so that's really seen as a very important part of the food action plan for the city of New Haven. That if we don't address it on that level also, and that can be just as much a community building effort and event and something that you do together in a way that can be meaningful and relationship building and community building. And so I just think it needs to be built into the whole thinking around food in the community.
In the urban farm, the person is looking out, one of their main jobs is to find out who lives here and what do they eat. You know, and how do we grow that stuff here? It's very important to grow the right kind of vegetables for the ethnic community that you're feeding. Otherwise, you're dead. You insulted people before you even started. You know, to assume everyone eating the whole planet eats the same food.
Yeah, and cooking matters. Anyone else? They are explaining cooking matters.
I had a question when you're ready.
Cooking matters. It's a statewide initiative, but they're really only in a few cities. They don't specifically target schools, but they do target underrepresented communities. They do cooking classes with women with young children who are living in community homes. Often they do cooking classes with people on SNAP benefits. They partner a lot with the local Stop and Shop when they opened up. And they're always looking for volunteers if anyone has cooking or nutritional skills.
There was a woman out of Meriden, I think she was working out of the Y, that was starting a nonprofit there on her own, very concerned about this issue about families, particularly low-income families with children, learning how to cook more nutritious.
Yeah. All right, last question, JR.
Oh, do I get the last one? I don't know if
You do. I think
I deserve it.
break into more of an informal group.
Sure, sounds great. So I was interested in what you said about putting gardens in, learning, iterating, and I think that sounds like a great model. But thinking from our experience as the land trust perspective is when we put in a garden and it's really active for a while maybe, and then it goes through this dormant period. And we have only 2 staff members. We try and build communities around these gardens. We can't go in and fix all the gardens while they're down. In fact, that's kind of a way to discourage people from getting activated and taking ownership of it. So how do you handle then when you have these failures? How do you handle the negative press or the negative consequence of having something overgrown that kind of symbolizes a failure.
Failure is awesome. Haven't you been reading your Buddhism? How else is the person going to learn? So I think if you're, and I thought we're mostly talking about school gardens as the subject matter, right? Because everything, I could easily go to the other stuff we do. But community gardens, we found, no, you have to screw up all the time. Because we're like, the movement is still just starting, right? And if we're lucky enough to 25 or 50 years from now, everyone's eating local food, you know, you look back to now as being when a lot of stuff happened, and you can't be the entrepreneur in the garage and be all rigid and formal and afraid to fail. So the rule number one is just get out there and do it, and don't worry about it. Second thing, in Bridgeport, when we committed to the 36 gardens, and even if a third completely fail, it's still a no-brainer, you know, for this price, for this level of activity. But the difference in the school gardens, there's a lot of support that you can build organizationally. Community garden, you really don't want to put it there and then run it. So the best community gardens are really community gardens, right? And so that, you know, we supported them with sort of funding, with information. So our community garden wanted to double. They said we need X amount of dollars. We said we'll give you half that, but we'll show you how to build a fence for half that too. So sometimes they need help, advice, you know, to make it easier. But if you don't really have the heartbeat of the community garden, then you're kind of in trouble. I wouldn't really know. I don't know if you guys have experience with that. But you can't give up either, because it just takes that one person, right, coming back. So what we would do with our interns is just maintain it from looking like a failure. I used to say I'm sneaking it at night with Miracle-Gro. I don't care if the thing's going to look good. Because, you know, we can't afford to be a reason why stuff doesn't work. That's the other risk of being a scout. You know what I mean? You have to somehow salvage stuff. You just have to do whatever it takes. So, but you have 50 community gardens, right? Yeah. And 2 in staff. So that's a big deal. But if in New Haven, if we're going to have a bunch of interns and you want to partner, because what we found, but just really quick with high school kids, it's really hard for them to find meaningful work. So when we built in Bridgeport, there was something called Groundwork Bridgeport, which was job training for high school kids, and they were tending butterfly gardens. As soon as we built the edible gardens, they said, can we use those for our programming? So I think there's kids and there's interns around, and what we love is the roving group of interns that maintains the garden at a certain level. And if you say to someone, you know, will you run the community garden and you don't have to do all the weeding and all the everything, we'll do a certain suite of services for you, then I think you might get better people signing up and sticking with it. Sorry.
Well, I think you have a different sort of level of finance and people, and I think that's a piece.
We're an all-volunteer organization.
Yeah, but I mean, you really have worked that volunteer end of things, and so maybe that's a piece of, I mean, we certainly have lots of people that volunteer on the committee, and we certainly do things with students, and so perhaps we have more work to do in that area.
Yeah, and that's the thing JR and I have talked about for this year, is getting a good volunteer coordinator, and just, we have a volunteer base, and how do we leverage that into, you know, making sure that we have interns and volunteers, and that it's more organized.
You guys don't, I wouldn't set the bar too high, because you guys were so early. Like, you have 50 community gardens. What other city or town in the state of Connecticut has 50? 0. The biggest other one has 18 or something, and falling. What other city? You know, you guys have done tremendous work, and it's almost like you want to make the basketball court, but you can't force the kids to play. It's like Michael Jordan coming along sooner or later. So I don't know if your job should be to force them to be, you know, a win, or just like make them an invitation, because the food, right, the local food thing is going to grow. The wave is here, and more people are all the time going to be looking to your garden.
They are.
I think it's tremendous what you guys have done.
All right, thank you. Well, on that final note, I think what I'll do is break our panel, and feel free to come and talk to the panelists at the time that they have permitting. But if we could give a big thank you to our panelists.